a look at closing off the general ledger accounts once we have finished posting all of our transactions. So we have a whole bunch of transactions going on. We are putting them in the accounts. There's debits and credits all over the show. The question is, how do we finish this process off? At the end of the month, we need to total these. We need to take them further, and it doesn't help us just to have rows and rows and rows of information. We need to make sure we can summarize it, and this is what we call closing off the general ledger. If we think of the debits and credits for income and expense accounts, our revenue transactions are credited, our expense transactions are debited, and if there are only expense or only credits or debits in an account, it's a lot easier to deal with because you can just total them. So I've given you an example, your expense account, stationery. We know that as an expense, stationery increases on the debit side. So we have two transactions in here, one on the 2nd of March, one on the 25th of March, and we'll see that at the end of the month, if I want to know what's happening with this, all I do is add it up, give it a total, and say it's 850. Now I know for a fact exactly how much I spent on stationery over the month, and when you take a look at an account, I can see exactly where the money came from as well. So income and expenses is not a problem. That one's quite easy to do. Assets and liabilities, again, think of the debits and the credits. For most of your assets accounts are debited, your liability transactions are credited, but if there are only debits and credits, as we've said, you just need a total. But what happens in situations where you have debits and credits in the same account, like the bank account, for example? When we have cash from a sale, that gets debited. When we have expenses or liabilities that are paid, the bank account is credited. So these ones are going to be a little bit more difficult, because if you can imagine our bank account, our little general ledger account, we're going to have transactions over here, we're going to have transactions over here. How do we get to a total if we've got transactions on both sides? Let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at an example. 3 transactions. On the 2nd of March, Tim paid 500 Rand to stationery or us for office stationery. He paid the amount from the business account. So let's set up these while we're here. So our first one, stationery for 500 on the 2nd of March. So we have a stationery account. And he paid it out of the, he paid it out of the bank account, out of the business bank account. So we need to have bank as well. Our debits and our credits. All right, so 500 Rand on the 2nd of March for office stationery. On the 2nd of March, he paid out of the bank 500 Rand. Stationery increases on the debit side because it is an expense, and the other side of the account, on the 2nd of March, he bought stationery. Handwriting's fabulous, and he bought it for 500 Rand. So number 1 is done. Number 2, on the 7th of March, he was paid 1,200 Rand for services rendered. So let's take an account over here, services rendered, and we have our debits and credits, and this was the 7th of March. And he would have put the money in the bank, and that came to 1,200. That means that this would be debited with 1,200, his services rendered. Okay, so his services rendered on the 7th of March, oh, handwriting's awful, on the 7th of March would have been debited. So we have an account, and we have a debit and a credit. On the 25th of March, he paid 350 Rand for paper and stationery, and he paid for it on the business account. So 25th of March, again out of the bank account, and this time it was 350 Rand. So in the bank account, he would have had stationery, 350, and that was the 25th of March. Okay. So these are basic, and this is kind of what we've been doing up to now. And the faster that you get, the more comfortable you'll get, the easier you'll be able to do this. And I hope yours looks a little bit neater than mine does. So when we take a look at this now, if we want to total these at the end of the month, if the manager comes back and says, look, how much did we actually spend, or if the owner comes back and says, how much did we actually spend on stationery, then I can tell you, well, I can just add that up. That's 850. In services rendered, it's very easy to get a total because there was only one sale, and that was for 1,200. The problem here is, how do we deal with the bank account? There are debits and credits. Merely to just add up the debit side and add up the credit side doesn't actually tell you or tell us what we need. And what I want to know at the end of the day is, how much do I have in the bank? After all the transactions have happened, how much do I have left? So the way that we go about this is as follows, and you need to learn this process, and you need to make sure you're very comfortable with it and it looks good, because you're going to get marks for these in the exam. So what we do is we leave a line open underneath your last transaction and we draw a double line. For us as accountants, our little double lines always means that we are creating totals. So what we do, and the best way to do this in exams is to do this with pencil so that you know exactly what you're doing. Always add up all of your debits and put a little pencil total in there. Okay, so at the moment there's only one of them, and there's 1,200. Add up all of your credits by themselves. 500, 350 gives us 850. Okay, so we put these in pencil at the bottom so that we know that once we're done with them, we can erase them. Once you've added up all your debits and all your credits, and you can imagine this would be a lot trickier if we had 7, 8, 9, 10 different transactions in the account, we see which one is bigger, the debit or the credit. Whichever total is bigger, we then put in pen inside our total column, and I go, okay, my biggest total is 1,200, and so that goes into both sides. Okay. What I then know is that what I'm looking at is my total is 1,200, and on the credit side over here, my credits only balanced up to 850. So what I need to do is create a balance for the difference. So 1,200 minus 850 is 350. So our difference between what that column was and the highest amount from the debit column gives us 350, and we call that our balance. So we write in there balance, and we put a little C/D, and that is called your balance carried down. So your balance carried down is 350, and basically what that's saying, if you take a look at it, what that's saying is that on the credit side, you need another 350 Rand to make up the amount that's on the debit side if you want this to balance. What we do from there is we then say we take this balance down to the other side, to the opposite side, and we say this is now a balance brought down, and we take exactly the same amount of 350 and we put it in there. And always make sure that once you're done, that you erase your pencil so that you don't leave them in the exam. So you erase your little pencil marks and off we go. So our closing off for items or for any accounts that have debits and credits, you add up your columns, you add up all your debits and your credits, you put a pencil total in there. Whichever one is higher, you put in both sides. You then subtract the one that is lower, identify what the difference between those are, put it in there as a balance carry down. You take it to the opposite side and you have your balance brought down. If you take a step back from this, it does seem a little weird and a little complicated. If you take a step back from this, it does actually make sense, because what we're saying is that our debits are higher than our credits, which they definitely are, which means you have a debit balance on your bank account. Okay, you have a debit balance on your bank account. You have more money left. You got 1,200 in and you only spent 850, which means you've got 350 left. If we have money in the bank, for us, it is always going to be a debit, which is why this lands up being a debit on this side over here. The reason it is a debit is because the amount that you got in, the 1,200, is 350 Rand higher than the amount that you spent. This is going to take a little bit of practice. Definitely going to take a little bit of practice. Make sure you go through a couple of these. Make sure you do them a couple of times and get good at this. Get very good and get very fast at this, because these are going to lose you some valuable marks. And you need these calculated correctly so that we can pull them through a little bit later as well.